This video is brought to you by Kinetics, your career matchmakers.
So over the years, we really have had a lot of changes in the US. We've had retrogression in 2008 where the US ran out of visas. We've had long delays with the visa bulletin. In more recent times, there has been a shift from the USCIS where we're seeing increased scrutiny, more requests for further evidence. There's a lot of changes that have happened on the immigration front. So to come to the reason, the purpose of this for tapping into the knowledge and wisdom that Carl is going to share with us, there's a lot of confusion from a lot of nurses about, can I still come to the US? If I come to the US, what kind of visa should I be going on? How does the licensing work? There's a lot of confusion on the market. So we really need to, hear from Carl about the different visas that are available. And what we've done is put together a list of questions that are the most common questions from an immigration perspective. In further Facebook sessions, we'll talk about licensing, we'll talk about demand, we'll talk about the difference between direct hire and staffing companies. So there's a lot to talk about. I'm going to pose the questions. These are just, I think we're going to start with the initial questions about what is the current situation, what are the different kinds of visas available, so we can get a basic idea of how a nurse can come into the US and what is possible and what's not possible. So the first question that we have for you, Carl, is can you give us a brief overview of the different types of visas for the registered nurses?
Yeah. Unfortunately, the temporary visas are very limited. That's actually what I testified in front of Congress several years ago. Back in the old days, before 1990, nurses would come on something called an H-1 visa, and we got hundreds of nurses these H-1 visas, and then they phased it out in the early 1990s. So really, the only types of temporary visas for registered nurses who were born abroad are some H-1B visas, but really only for nurse managers, for nurse practitioners, and for CRNAs, certified registered nurse anesthetists. But it's very hard for just, ICU nurse or OBGYN nurse to get an H-1B because the H-1B says that a college degree, a 4-year college degree is the minimum requirement. And with hospitals having American nurses with 2-year degrees in those same jobs, the immigration comes back and says, well, it really doesn't require a 4-year degree. So that these advanced practice nurses, we've been successful in getting them H-1Bs. But another thing that's starting to emerge, Tanya, is that a lot of the nurses in the last 10 years from Philippines, from India, from various countries, from Jamaica, have gone to Canada. And in Canada, we just happen to have this, or we have it today. I will see whether we have it in no, we will have a NAFTA agreement. They may alter which occupations can get visas. But nurses can get a TN visa, a trade NAFTA visa, as long as these nurses have become citizens of Canada. And we've been bringing in hundreds of these nurses on TN visas.
Correct. So, Carl, just to go back to the H-1 visas for a moment. In fact, it's actually quite interesting because we know of a hospital in the South that had been sponsoring some nurses on H-1 visas, and those cases have now been denied. So, because my understanding has always been that you can only really have an H-1 visa in today's times if you're a nurse manager, a nurse practitioner, or a CRNA. Correct.
I think that's largely correct. Yeah. I think some of the companies tried to game the system a little, but I don't think that's going to work with this administration. I mean, they're being really tough about it, and I think H-1Bs are not a practical solution for most nurses. They have to go straight to the green card.
Okay, so the first thing that we've learned from the expert Carl Schusterman is that H-1Bs are really not an option in most cases, for nurses, for international nurses, unless you're a nurse manager, nurse practitioner, CRNA, or some kind of specialty area. So that leaves the green card, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so I think, we already skipped a question. So can you tell us a little bit about the difference between a green card and a TN visa?
Okay, well, a TN is a temporary visa. It's very quick to get a TN. We've got them for nurses in just a few days. Green card is a longer process, and green cards are grouped into, in the employment-based green cards, there's 140,000 a year, and they're grouped into different categories. We call them the EB categories, the employment-based green cards. Nurses are usually in the EB3 category for professionals. And most countries have no backlogs at all, but the 3 countries that do have backlogs in the EB3 category are India, huge backlog over 10 years. China, also a long backlog, not quite as bad as India. And the Philippines, although I must say because I would say maybe my wife is Filipino, by the way, she's from Cebu. And I think I immigrated all her nieces or all her...
The whole family.
Most of her nieces have gone through Canada and come here, but some have come straight from the Philippines. But just 2 years ago, the Philippine quota for nurses, it took almost 8 years. Now we're down to 18 months. So even though that might seem like a long time, in comparison, I mean, we're bringing in way more Filipino nurses this year than we have for the last 10 years.
Yeah, correct. So, and from our side, we have offices in the Philippines. We bring in literally thousands of Filipino nurses. And it has really been quite a joy to see how many people have been able to arrive here. I mean, I was at a hospital that we work with 2 weeks ago. There was a nurse that I met in 2007 in the Philippines before retrogression, and she just arrived in the US. We both really cried when we saw each other. So for many Filipinos as well as Indian and Chinese nurses, it's been a long wait. So there's been those long wait times. But at least there is hope on the horizon. I see we have a question from Kelly O'Neill. What is the difference between an H-1 visa and permanent residency?
Okay. So the H-1 visa is like the TN, it's a temporary work visa. If the hospital applies for you and you're an advanced practice nurse, usually, unfortunately, there's another problem with the H-1Bs, which is for most employers, there's some exceptions like universities and so on, and you can check out on our website, our H-1B visa page. I have a video about this. But for most nurses, they're going to work for private employers, and so there's 85,000 limit on the number of H-1Bs. This year we had 190,000 petitions.
Wow.
So that means chances are not even 50% to get an H-1B if you're a nurse practitioner or CRNA. So I urge nurses to do one of two things. Either if they are H-1B qualified because they're advanced practice, get a job with one of those 5 types of employers that are exempt from the cap, like universities, or just go straight to the green card, because within 18 to 24 months, we can get green cards for the nurses. But the green card is a permanent resident, so you can stay for the rest of your life in the U.S., while an H-1B is just a temporary working visa.
Yeah. Okay. So Kelly, I hope you can see the answer to that question. And permanent resident and green card or EB3 green card is synonymous, right? That's the same thing. Correct. Okay. I saw we also had a question, and it's just disappeared from the screen, about the I-140. We were going to talk about the process for, for an adjustment of status green card and a consulate green card. I'm just looking at the time. We might not have enough time to do that. But maybe you want to just explain what an I-140 is?
Right. So the first step in an employer sponsoring a nurse for a green card, and in fact, let me just back up a minute, because I'm sure a lot of you have had friends that have immigrated through their jobs, and you know that most of your friends, the employer had to advertise the job, show that they couldn't find a qualified American. It's called PERM, and you go through the Labor Department for a few months to do that. Two jobs left on the list that are exempt from PERM, and fortunately one of them is RN. The other one is a physical therapist.
Okay.
So these people, those two occupations have been designated as shortage occupations in the U.S. So we totally skip that advertising job, which employers are very glad that they don't have to put these ads in the paper. So what they filed, the first thing is called a visa petition. It's the immigration form I-140, and they show that they have a qualifying job, that they're going to pay the foreign nurse at the prevailing wage. They can't pay less than what they pay the American nurses, and that the nurse does have the degree and is licensed. And there's other things we can talk about that don't go to the I-140, but they go to the green card stage, something called the visa screen and English test and so on.
Okay. All right. So that's helpful information about the I-140. In terms of the green card processing, before we get to the actual process and how the adjustment of status green card and the consulate green card differs, maybe we can just talk a little bit about if you are a Filipino and you have not been sponsored before, can you go for the green card? If you are an Indian nurse and you have not been sponsored before, can you go for the green card? Because
right,
we know the answer, but I want you to just maybe share that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there is one advantage to being sponsored before, is that if you have an approved I-140 from years ago and somehow didn't come to the U.S. or you were on a waiting list and now that employer doesn't want you anymore, what you do is you have the new employer file an I-140 for you, and we say you can, the legal term, you can recapture the old priority date. So instead of waiting in line for 18 months or for an Indian nurse 10 years, you might be able to really shorten it up by using the old priority date. And we've done that numerous times.
Yeah. We have thousands of nurses that we've helped with previous priority dates that had priority dates from before retrogression, were abandoned by their employers at that time because they couldn't get into the US, and then came through now at this time. In fact, that nurse I was just telling you about was one who has a previous priority date. So just to clarify and make sure everybody gets that. So basically what you're saying is that if you are a country other than born, and it's all about where you're born, correct?
Exactly.
So if you're born in a country other than India, Philippines, and China, you can file a new green card petition, no problem, correct?
Right. There's no backlog.
There's no backlog, so it's current.
Yes.
Okay. If you are born in the Philippines, you can do a new petition now. Okay. It will take probably about, they said about 15 months.
It's more like 18 right
okay.
now. Yeah.
So 15 to 18 months. And every month we will get a new visa bulletin coming out. And maybe that's a topic we can talk about next week.
Right.
About the visa bulletin.
If I can mention one thing, it's no money or sales involved, but for 23 years, I think I've driven my wife crazy because I come out with a monthly newsletter, and the most read part of that newsletter is the visa bulletin, because there's 4.5 million people waiting for their dates. So if you go on our website on Schusterman.com and just scroll down a little and look on the right side, you can sign up for a free copy of our newsletter, and so you can keep up with the priority dates, how long it's taking.
So Khalid asked, what is meant by priority date? Priority date means that you had a previous petition that where the case was maybe abandoned, maybe at the time of retrogression, and what Carl is saying is we can recapture that date.
But the actual term priority date for a nurse is the date that the Immigration Service receives that I-140 petition, even if it's the first time you're doing that.
But is it when they receive it, or isn't it when they approve?
No, when they receive it.
Oh, okay.
So they can
Okay.
If your hospital or your healthcare provider employer files an I-140, no reason to sweat if it takes 6 months to approve, because it's the date that they filed it that determines when you're going to be able to come to the U.S., not how long it takes to approve it.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Thanks for clarifying that. So just to go back to the countries that are in backlog. So Philippines, we spoke about. China, there is a longer backlog.
Yes.
How long, if you were to find a new Chinese petition right now, how long would that take?
Well, I would say 5 to 10 years.
Okay. So that's a long time. And then India, I think, is the longest, right?
Yeah, India, what you have to realize is that when you look at the priority dates and you look at India, and maybe, I'm not looking at it right this second, but maybe the EB3 category is 2008. So you think, well, we're in 2018 now, so it's a 10-year backlog. That's not what it means. It means if you filed in 2008, you'll get the green card in 2018. But it's much longer because there's so many people who filed their petitions between 2008 and 2018 that it could literally take a lifetime to get a green card.
Yeah.
Because
it's not just nurses. I mean, it's all
Oh, yes,
specialists, and there's a lot of IT.
Right. It's because there's no quotas on the H-1B visas for PERC. There is an overall cap of 85,000. But if everybody was from India or everybody was from the Philippines, it wouldn't matter. But then when they go from H-1B to green cards, then no country can have over 7% of the total.
Okay.
So then it becomes just a nightmare for a lot of people. I do want to mention one thing because sometimes people don't understand it. I have YouTube videos about this, but it's called cross-chargeability. So let's say you're from India, but your spouse is from Sri Lanka, but you're the nurse or you're the IT person. You can use your spouse's country of birth instead of your country of birth. It's called cross-chargeability. And instead of waiting 20 years to get a green card, you can probably get it in 18 months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So we are career matchmakers in that we don't work specifically with one hospital. We work with literally hundreds of hospitals all over the US. Carl works with hundreds of hospitals all over the US. So we really have a lot of expertise in understanding and knowing this field. So thank you, everybody. And we will definitely make sure to answer your questions. So please post if you have any additional questions. And we look forward to catching up with you next week. You're also welcome to send us more questions if you have them, and we can post it to the expert next week.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Look forward to seeing you again.
And have a good weekend. Thank you. Bye-bye.